migration, forced displacement, or all forms of forced human mobility is something that our continent knows so well. In fact, 1/3 of globally displaced persons are in Africa, and that is a staggering figure. We are not going to particularly focus on trafficking, but on all issues that pertain to human mobility, especially forced migration, refugees, asylum seekers, irregular migration, and internet displaced persons. One of the things which is very interesting, and I have worked in this area for the last 15 to 20 years, is to look at the root causes. And it is very particularly important this year, as the African Union theme of the year is justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. One of the things that is normally not discussed within the context of the issue, the root causes that pushes people to move, of course we know them: conflict, climate change, youth unemployment, cultural and religious practices. And I think that this morning, the first panel, we're able to also talk about these ideas in a bit. But one thing that I want us to look at today in a nuanced way is the impact of the transatlantic slave trade and colonization in the underdevelopment of Africa. We know that the enslavement of Africans and colonization was an extractive economy that was meant to put Africa down in terms of development, but to benefit the European territories. Unfortunately, the church was part of it. The first people to come here, Portuguese, who came here to colonize Africans based on a paper book. And so one of the elements that we are discussing at the African Union within the theme of the year is what is reparations. And that links up with this whole issue of mobility and migration, because we know that families serve their own children, if I may use the word so, or the trafficking that goes on within the rural-urban migration itself is an issue. It's not just an issue that people are leaving the African continent and going to other places, but because of the vulnerable conditions, conflict is a main driver of migration from our continent. So we're going to look at, as a panel, we're going to look at these contributing factors and how do faith communities respond to these challenges that we have on the continent. And we have a very good panel here to discuss these issues who are involved on the day-to-day management of these issues. So to the panelists, I will give each of you 5 minutes, and we can start from my extreme left. So first, introduce yourself, your organization, and what you're doing. And I want you to look at 3 things. One is, how do faith communities respond to these questions of migration, forced displacement, and human trafficking? But are there also any best practices that we have been able to learn over the years, and how can these be turned to recommendations for the G20? Yeah, so also for you, the participants, I also want you to think on these lines. In your work, what have been the challenges that you have faced in dealing with mobility? In fact, the first place that many of the migrants go, or people who are trafficked go to, is either a church or they go to a mosque, because they want to belong to a community. So I know most of you have got this experience that we're going to share with us. So we're going to start, without further ado, I will give the floor to my dear sister, and you start. Please introduce yourself and start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Lontulungu, and I do work for a non-profit that is based in Kenya that is called Awareness Against Human Trafficking. And the focus of the company is looking into being able to counter human trafficking in all its forms. So we do have programs around prevention where we do work with schools, communities, first responders, the leaders, institutions, and as well as looking into government, but then also holistically being able to see how do we amplify the voice of the communities to the broader community, looking into regionally and globally as well. And to respond to the question, how do faith communities respond to the issue we're looking at today? I would say I've been in this space for the last 15 years, and we've been able to see a difference when it comes to the understanding of the issue of human trafficking. And I would say where I first saw the first response was coming from the Catholic Church, where we had the Pope being able to pioneer different initiatives, working with different religious communities, with the young people, looking into being able to actually have human trafficking being prioritized within the church, including being able to identify a day to commemorate the issue of human trafficking, which is the 8th of February. And I would say from this engagement, we've seen also the Muslims being able to have more discussions and more engagements on this topic, looking into how do we have then the public being informed more. What is happening? How do we respond? How do you do your due diligence? But then again, being able to see services being offered. We do have shelters that are being run purely by religious institutions that are able to host victims of this crime. When we have people being displaced, they're able to offer shelter, basic needs, daily necessities. But then we also have those who have traumatic experiences. So looking into areas of psychosocial support being made available. But then also lastly looking into connections. The beauty of the church or the religious communities, looking into the Muslims and the temples where they exist, it's across the group. They're able to actually make referrals from one country to the other, from one region to the other. And I think that has been the beauty when it comes to our response mechanisms. What I would say I've been able to see as the best practice, I would say is the aspect of being able to reach as many people as possible within the people who come to our places of worship. And so when it comes to awareness creation, we've been able to see a lot of focus being able to be directed to these platforms. A lot of discussions taking place with different groups, the women, the young people, them being able to understand what is happening and how best we actually support each other. I think the other area we've been able to see, which I would say is a new for me, is being able to also see the space of access to justice also being supported by the religious communities. So looking into being able to support victims, at least show up in courts, being able to see supporting them, sometimes even to travel to be present in these spaces. But then also being able to champion and fight for their rights as well, looking into what was done against them, being able to see how that can be rectified. And I'll see the other best parts that I'm able to see is looking into capacity enhancement. Beyond awareness creation is being able to also see how do we enhance, first of all, our own capacities to be able to actually do the right job as we go out to the public. Because sometimes we can end up causing a lot of harm by just doing it out of goodwill, wanting to be able to reach many people, but then we end up causing more harm. I'll take a break there to give the other speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your intervention. What I do like about what you have said is the community involvement and the community participation within this process, engaging them and amplifying that voice of the community, and especially you used your church as an example. There's also not looking beyond and beyond the suffering, but also empowering. Giving empowerment, bringing out the resilience in the victims of trafficking, as you have said. And also the role of the church to be there as a comforter, to be there to look at the holistic healing of the person. So thank you so much. I will then move then to.
Thank you. The issue of human trafficking, obviously, I spoke about at length in the previous session. But I just want to address the point of the transatlantic slave trade, as raised by my colleague here. Nothing has changed around the way that we view people, particularly when we're looking at supply chains. The reason for the transatlantic slave trade was cheap and free labor. powerful nations attacking and imprisoning and exploiting less powerful nations or people who were vulnerable. And today, the very reasons why human trafficking and modern slavery exist are for those very reasons. So that the wealthy or those in a position of authority or in business can get free or cheap labor, or we want to exploit people and use them for our gratification. So nothing has changed in many ways. And we need to start looking at that in the sense of we need to understand reparations, but what about the reparations of today, the current victims of these crimes? Where is all that money going, the 236 billion? We need to find that, to give that to the victims and to prevent these crimes from happening. And of course, mobility and migration, as we've heard, comes by many reasons, but mainly from conflict, because of climate change, because of vacuums of power. And when people move and they believe that they're going to greater places of protection, that isn't always the case, as we see in Europe. But if we turn our clocks back to 2015, when Alan Kurdi was washed up on the beaches of Turkey, the world cried out. In fact, the election process in Canada was halted. President Erdogan of Turkey said that was our sons and our families at the bottom of the ocean, and we needed to protect them. New Zealand flew a flag to remember Alan Kurdi. The British Prime Minister spoke about it, the Irish Prime Minister, and across the world. Every country saw this tragedy and spoke about it as a tragedy. Now in the United Kingdom, where we see people being killed in the Channel, they're talked about as if they are criminals, and they're blamed. So as the Interfaith Forum and as the G20, we need to talk about this with compassion, but we need to talk about it with practical solutions. And that is why I am pleased that the Interfaith Forum is launching this working group to look at trafficking in all its forms, to look at how we can start to better understand migration routes, and how if you have safe migration routes. Last week I met the ambassador of Costa Rica, who talked about their working practices and how people who are migrants can get good work and be secure and help the economy, as opposed to being stigmatized. We need more of that. We need more of the positive work. I was a police officer for 30 years in the UK. Our health service, our social services, our local services could not exist without migrant workers. Our agriculture and many businesses require migrant workers. So we need to start to recognize and respect what migrants bring to our populations. And we need to do that in a very structured way within the G20. Sometimes it hurts us when we talk about the economic advantages of working with migrants. But if we look at how many countries have been built on remittances, on the ability of people to travel. My own country, where I now live, Hyland, was built on remittances by people going to the United States or to the UK or to Canada or Australia. But when they were first doing it, they weren't always welcome. There were many deaths traveling. There were many deaths when they arrived in destinations. So we do see history repeating itself. But as my colleague here to my right has said, we need to understand those problems. But we must remember, when it comes to human trafficking, it's not inevitable. It only happens because a person, persons, a company, a government, or some other criminal actor intervenes and uses that vulnerability to generate money. And we need to challenge that. And we need to challenge it at the G20 level and at every national level, because this is a risk to human beings. It creates human suffering. It's a risk to national security, international security. And we, as people of faith, but we as the global community, have a very compelling duty to stop it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I like that you said reparations is not a question of the past,
principles today, and that the economic models that propelled the transatlantic slave trade and colonization are still the same today. And so the global, that is why, if I speak from the African Union side, that is why there's a call for the reform of the institutions, including the Security Council itself. And so the voice of faith communities, as you have said, is very important in terms of advocacy and making clear that migration is not the problem. The movement of people is not the issue. The issue is having it done in a regular, safe manner. So advocating for safe pathways to migration, and also emphasizing the positive elements of migration itself. Most of us, as you have said, our countries are built on remittances. Most remittances come back to Africa to augment health insurance policies. And so thank you for bringing that up and for emphasizing that migration is not an issue if we harness the benefits of migration. I'll then now move to Sister Agnes, if you could give your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Sister Agnes Njeri is a sister of St. Joseph of Mombasa, and I work for the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, helping sisters initiatives across Africa. So we fund sisters and the work they do. And one of the important work they do is to help people who are trafficked. So what have we done? We have created networks of human trafficking, sisters against human trafficking across Africa. One is because these people who are being trafficked are our brothers and sisters from different countries. They come from Uganda, land in Kenya to be trafficked maybe to the UAE, United Arab Emirates. How do we coordinate these efforts? But first of all, he said, we have to address the root causes of these problems. One of the root causes is poverty and lack of economic sustainability. Most of our youths are trafficked. Girls and boys are trafficked because probably they have finished their high schools or primary schools, but they have nothing to do. So somebody comes and say, we have a very lucrative job in Oman. And what do? The girls and the boys run to get employment because basically that's what is lacking. Their parents are informed that we have good jobs in the Middle East, and then they are recruited. Without due processes of recruitment for this job, companies are coming up, getting a lot of profits for these young people to be just trafficked. So addressing the root cause, sisters are trying to empower the youth with skills and some seed grants so that this youth can be empowered, because when the youth has no work, has nothing to live for, they can die for anything. So that's basically what they do. Another thing we address is ignorance and lack of knowledge. Because when somebody comes and they recruit really from the deep villages because they know people don't have the knowledge of what happens outside. So basically we have sensitization programs. We go to churches, to mosques, to different denominations. We use the village elders to sensitize this youth that do not go out in the promise of a good job to somewhere and follow people who you don't have a real contract with them. We are also trying a lot to advocacy with the governments, because most of these people who start companies or even consultancies to transport people are given these legal documents by the government. So what are we doing, sisters? We are trying to advocate for these people not to get legal documents to transport human beings. So sisters go, they have formed a network that can go to the government and say, what are we supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? You probe these companies that are coming up. Do you have due processes? One of the rescued lady told us, a girl, that when they go, they are paraded just like you parade your tomatoes. So somebody comes and picks you. And the worst thing is that once they go there, it's domestic servitude. You work 24 hours even with no pay, sometimes no pay, because most of these companies say that we paid for your transport, so we will take the first salaries, like 6 months' salary. So the person is there at the mercy of these people. Their passports are withdrawn. So sensitization is the key thing that we do. And then finally, we also try to bring back the people who have been trafficked. These networks are very powerful because we interconnect with different countries, that if the youth are found, for example, the recent incident is where 20 girls from Karamojong were trafficked to Nairobi, and they were closed in a house, ready to be taken to the Middle East. But then we have a hotline that we call amongst ourselves. We have these people, what do we do? So we called, we were able to rescue them, and then the sisters will take them back. But you cannot just take them back. You have psychological support for these people because they feel also ashamed to go back without any income. We take them through psychological support. Then we ask them, what do you want to do for a living? If they want to go back to school, we then take them back to school. If they want a startup or if they want a skill, we empower them so that once they are empowered, they will go back in a different way. So they will not be ashamed to go back. So I'll stop there and we'll talk more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I thank you all for keeping to the time. And Sister, you highlighted again the importance of community involvement. You know, the elders, the discussion with the elders. But also something you said is collaboration, the building of networks, how you have been able to build these networks to support, but also you raised again education, because most of the girls, mostly girls and boys who are trafficked, is because they don't know the issues involved. They are promised a job. If you come, I will take you to a football, I'll provide you with a football team, as it was said here. Yesterday, actually, you know, whilst we were here, I had a phone call that one of the men from Ghana that we've been trying to work with footballers in this country. He got into a debt and he could not pay, and he committed suicide because his agent was chasing him. And this was yesterday in Ethiopia, not in the Middle East, but here. So it's important that we look at this and advocate also with the government institutions, you know, and provide that support also to them, but also not neglecting, finally, as you said, to look at the vulnerability of the victims of trafficking. And just to give you an anecdote, I used to run at one of the largest refugee centers in Malta, the island of Malta, where people were crossing from Libya into Italy. And many times you would find that the women are having children with the men who are trafficking them because they want to feel secure with someone. They are having a baby. They will even tell you, oh, that's my husband. And then you find out that she's trafficked. And then you say, would you want to be rescued? And in many cases, they would say exactly what Sister said. What do I go back home to do? Or what do I go home to tell them? I have lost money. My family has sold things to pay for this journey. I have had a baby with a man who is not my husband, but at least he has protected me all the way from my village in Ghana, Nigeria, and brought me all the way far to a place like Malta where I'm just seeing the promised land ahead of me. What do I want to go back? So they deny. They say, please, I am not trafficked. I'm doing this voluntarily. Until you start counseling, and then you then say there's a pathway. And that's where the church or faith-based communities come in. So thank you. So now it's time to come back to you. We will take 3 questions or 3 contributions, and then we will then go back again, give some answers, and then come again. But specifically, one question that was asked. And I think that I will let the panelists starting with Praeveni. Maybe you wrote some notes. Could you intervene at any point that you believe that you can add some more in it? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all the contributions. One thing that I would like to underscore is the power that we have, everyone who is in this room. And I think if we can all agree, if we are all able to speak in one voice, we could be able to save more people within a week than what is going to happen in the next 10 years. Let's go back to what happens when we had COVID-19. That was back in 2019, 2020. We saw everyone being able to actually collectively come together and being able to sensitize the masses, the public, on the importance of having to wash their hands, wearing the masks, knowing what to do and where to report to. And within a very short time, we're able to really empower the communities for them to know what to do in case even you're infected. And the question that comes to mind is, do our people know what to do when someone approaches you with an opportunity? Be it they're going to educate your child, be it they're promising to marry someone off, or be it an opportunity for you to get a job opportunity. Do we know what they should be able to know to actually do some due diligence? And the question that, or the answer to this question, we know some of our governments do have some policies, some frameworks in place. However, this stays in our offices. When it comes to access to this information, it becomes a challenge. And so then we are all left vulnerable to these bad actors, the traffickers, who are very well organized and coordinated. And so if we were all to agree as the faith communities that once we go back home, all of us are going to ensure that we're going to make an effort to actually be able to sensitize the masses that we're able to interact with on a day-to-day basis, then we'll be talking about something different the next convening we'll be having as the interfaith community. And so that would be my greatest call for action. If we can all work together to sensitize the masses and the public on what to look out for, and in case something goes wrong, where do you report to, then they have the power to know how to actually do an assessment and know what action to take next. A lot has been mentioned looking into the bad actors. And I would say it's because, again, they are organized. I would say back in 2010, in 2000, most traffickers were individuals. It was someone that you know that would come and talk to you, and then these things would go south. But right now, we have more cartels being involved. It's becoming more organized. However, those who are responding to the issue are less organized. We are having people operating or acting in isolation. The faith community acting on one end. We do have the government actors, the investigators, the prosecution acting separately, the NGOs acting by themselves, the public left to themselves. And this is where the traffickers are thriving because they know where the loopholes are, even through the legal systems. They know where we are having gaps in policies. They know when it comes to the jurisdictions, what is going to be the gap between Kenya and Uganda, between Kenya, India, and Nepal, whichever country you're talking about. They know what the loopholes are. And we've mentioned that the Africans are the ones who are doing the trafficking situation. It's not unique for trafficking. Most of the time, trust is what is betrayed by traffickers. And so across the globe, you'll find the people who are actually doing the recruitment, it's the locals. It's a fellow Indian who is recruiting a fellow Indian. It's a fellow Kenyan, a fellow Ugandan who is going to be doing the recruitment of these individuals. However, when it comes to the exploitation, you'll find a different individual altogether or still the same community being involved. And so it's not unique looking into who does the recruitment. We know who they are, and it's people that we are familiar with because trust is heavily betrayed. And it's looking into us being able to tell people, even if it's your own sibling, your own relative, your own friend, please, so long as whatever you're being told appears to be true to actually to believe, please question it and knowing where do you go to verify this information. I would like to just respond to one more question, the question on governance. With all these crimes that we are talking about, the issues of conflict, refugees, displacement, what we're talking about as the push factors to human trafficking, they are all linked to governance issues. If you're able to actually address the issues employment, Not what we are doing in, I'll give an example of what is happening in our own country, where the government has prioritized a labor exportation program, where we are actually having the government itself taking its own people to go and work in other parts of the world. Questions of what is being negotiated, what is being actually proposed for them to be paid, questionable. The rules that are being used, we are questioning all these things. So sometimes the approaches we use as we respond to the problems might be more problematic than actually being able to address the issue. So if we're really able to address the root causes, would be also having different questions. So looking into how do we really also empower the people that we are working with, sort of giving them the bread. Let's teach them how to do the fishing. Let them really have the power in their hands to be able to make the decisions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the questions. And I'm going to start off by saying, and I'll come back to the issue of bad governance, but what we need to remember is that no continent is exempt from human trafficking and modern slavery. It's happening everywhere in the world. And of course, it's a global issue now, as it was over centuries, not just limited to the transatlantic slave trade. But for example, in the UK, last year, almost 19,000 trafficked victims and victims of modern slavery were identified. 5,000 of those were British nationals. And in the UK, in the United States of America, thousands of American girls are trafficked each year for the demand of sexual exploitation. So this is happening everywhere. So governance is not very good anywhere. And in the UK, stores like McDonald's have had people in slavery in Main Street McDonald's, working in there under slave-like conditions. And in high street supermarkets, their supply chains have also had people in slavery. So this goes into what was mentioned, the economic imbalance. And the models that are there within industry and business and in societal norms actually increase that economic imbalance instead of trying to balance it, even within the well-developed nations. For example, workers who are migrants are charged the highest levels of remittances, yet these are some of the lowest paid. Workers who go from Vietnam to, say, Taiwan are charged 11, 12, and 13%. And that is after they may have had to pay a fee for the job and may have be tied to a place where they have to live. And yet one of the Sustainable Development Goals is to bring down remittance fees to 0 or 1%. That could make a massive difference to local households in Vietnam, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and globally. There's 870 billion US dollars every year in remittances. How much of that is stolen? How much of that is taken away from households, whereby those households could then pay for the food for siblings, pay for the food for grandparents, pay for food for the parents or the family, and allow girls and others to go to school. So we need to look at the economic imbalances and look at how we can start to level them out with business and with the financial industries. But also we need sanctions within that. If you have money crossing a company or crossing a business or the finance industry and it's connected to terrorism, the company will halt until it finds the source of that, where it was intended to, and they will report it to all the authorities. Any bank that doesn't do that will face hundreds of millions in fines. If you have millions going across that comes from modern slavery and human trafficking, a company might not do anything other than just let it go. So we need to make sure that governance is integrated into policies that fit within the Financial Action Task Force and other governance of the World Bank and other things connected to loans and world economy. So in the Leaders' Declaration in Brazil, through the work of the IF20, human trafficking and modern slavery was included, and particularly around the world of governance. So through the network of the G20, let's make sure that the efforts that have started since 2018 in Argentina through the IF20 to raise the profile of human trafficking and modern slavery now is put into action, and not just in the declaration made by the leaders. And let's start giving them the answers that fit within the G20 economies. For example, remittances. For example, leveling the imbalance of the economies. For example, the fact that migration and migrant workers contribute. They don't take away. Thank you.
Thank you. Much has been said. I'll just add on a little about trafficking in its entirety. We are not only talking about domestic servitude, we talk about sexual exploitation. Nowadays, there's donation of organs. Like we had a bad story going on where people are migrating to Kenya to receive kidneys. Who are selling these kidneys? These are very desperate people. Organs have been sold. It's only their slavery or human trafficking is very big, it's very wide. It's not only for domestic servitude or even sexual exploitation. There are so many things that go along with human trafficking. So what are we supposed to do? We are the religious people. We are the people who live with the people who are being trafficked. What I've seen work most is the networking. Networking is very, very key. Every region here despises in all forms of slavery. It does. And we have organizations from different religions that do not advocate for slavery. And they also go for things against human trafficking in all forms. How does it look when we come together? We form a network of religious people or interfaith against human trafficking. We'll have a voice, a bigger voice to the government. And that will help us address the root cause of bad governance, corruption, because these people is a big cartel. And they give a lot of money to the government. So we can rescue these people who are trafficked. But do we really get these people prosecuted? One or two, but it's a big cartel because they have good money to bribe their way out. They have money to silence anything. And also, those people who are working with, in this work are also threatened. Their lives are at stake. We sometimes really hide these people because these big goons who are doing trafficking are looking for who are these educating our people about against trafficking. We are not getting enough people from this part of the world. We are not getting people from Ethiopia. We are not getting people. So we also protect these people. We have to work with our legal system. We have to work with volunteers from different regions. We have sisters who are lawyers who also help us to make sure these people get their justice. And when they come back, sometimes their documents have been confiscated. So we make sure they get the documents back and they get back their rights. So what do we do as religious people? It is coming together. There are some, like for example, how do we reinforce legislation in different countries? We have the kafara system, which allows somebody to own another person, like a slave. We have seen this because we work with people we have agents in the Middle East who really report that there are people who are suffering. So they repatriate them and we take them. But one of the hardest things for us to get the people trafficked in the Middle East is because of the kafala system, that they own that slave. So we buy them back to bring them back. So how do we, as the G20, interfaith people for the G20, tell all these nations that let us put laws that govern the human dignity, that do not give at least a precedence to somebody to own another human person. Because if that works, our governments follow the law, and then the laws that guard human dignity are followed, and then we don't have corruption. We can minimize that, and we can have back our people without, because finally they'll come to blame us. You looked at us being trafficked, but you did nothing. So we want to be proactive. We want to help these people from the grassroots to the governments. But we have a voice as religious people. We do. I have seen that because sometimes we went to the parliament, the sisters, and they were like, what are the sisters doing here? Suppose now we had some imams, some people, they will listen to you. They will listen to us. Even if they act today and forget tomorrow, we will persist and we will get through. Thank you.
Thank you. What I just wanted to comment on was what the chaplaincy at the AU and a number of you have said regarding the African Union. What you said is very true. But as you may know, the African Union as an institution is a reflection of its member states. The African Union does not have a supernatural power. Everything is done by consensus by the member states. And it's not because there's absence of legal instruments or policy. I have been fortunate enough to be part of the drafting of most of these policies. You know, we have policy against trafficking. I remember that when we're drafting it. But you go outside the African Union itself, and you see young children who are Ethiopians, 7, 8 years, polishing shoes of people who are entering the African Union. And yet there's a policy to stop child labor and trafficking. Again, I think that the economic conditions that drives all of this has to be looked at. And I think that this is where the voice of the faith communities is very, very important, because most of our leaders are religious. In fact, you can see yesterday, even the chairperson of the African Union Commission, before he started speaking, he recited a prayer. At the African Union, at every summit, there is a prayer breakfast. But the prayer breakfast does not talk about these issues that are to be deliberated during the assembly itself. And I think that this is where the governance issue and the disconnect is. So what we have been saying here is to raise the voice. For example, there is a protocol on the free movement of persons in Africa and a protocol on free trade. These protocols were adopted on the same day. One of them, the protocol on free trade, the ACFTA, was overwhelmingly adopted the following year. It's been what, since 2019, 18? The protocol on free movement of persons, which is going to be one of the solutions for refugees, durable solution for refugees, IDPs. As one of our brothers have said, it is more difficult to travel within Africa itself than it is to travel abroad. You know, so even to come in here for us as diplomats into Ethiopia, sometimes it's difficult because of the visa regimes, and it's the same everywhere. So this freedom of movement protocol has been ratified by 4 countries out of 55 since 2019. So you can see that the political will, in fact, the All Africa Council of Churches have done a research, and they're doing a research on that issue to see how the advocacy of the faith-based communities would be brought to bear. So I would say that from the African Union side, this interfaith community, the IF20, would be critical in terms of querying our leaders. If you are going to do these things, how are we going to do it before it will affect your own people and your own country? So, for example, there is a strong advocacy at the moment for the reform of the Security Council. There's a strong call for the African Union for the reform of the financial institutions. And the illicit financial flows out of Africa is incredible. But we are speaking, as you have said, without one voice. So Africa being part of the G20 is a very, very important political move, because they will be on the table, as someone said yesterday, not just speaking from outside, but they'll be from within. But how can the African Union move if we faith-based communities are not interacting with it? And I'm sure that most of you have got some kind of relationship with the African Union in terms of the liaison office, the AACC, you know, and other groups as well, as Father Okello had said. And is to continue speaking to the African Union and to raising that moral voice Because once the process, the African Union's processes are very cumbersome. Before any policy decision goes to the Assembly, it has to go to the specialized technical committees, which has to go through a department, which has to go through the PRC, the Permanent Representative Committee, which has to go through the Council of Ministers, which is the Executive Council, before it is adopted. So if there's no disengagement between the faith-based communities and the African Union, what we are discussing and what we are sharing here gets lost. So African Union being part of the G20 and this advocacy role that the IF20 is playing, in my view, is very, very important and very, very critical in this conversation. But the African Union does not do anything that its member states do not agree. There are many times that the African Union will propose issues and then the member states will not follow through. So the African Union is left powerless. They cannot say any. There's no one, the chairperson of the African Union rotates every year. But the chairperson of the commission is rotating also every 4 years. So if you don't have a good management, then the gaps are there. But the hope, as we are saying, as Pastor Kelo has said, is that we put this to prayer, but not only to prayer, but our voice on advocacy also is louder. So we have 30 minutes or 20 minutes to wrap up. If there are any persons who want to contribute or ask questions, we can take another round.
አመሰግናለሁኝ የመጣሁት ከኢትዮጵያ ኦርቶዶክስ ተዋሕዶ ቤተክርስቲያን መንበረ ፓትርያርክ ጠቅላይ ቤተ ክህነት ስሜ የምንውረ እድ አባ ዮሐንስ የሚለው ስም ግራ እንዳይገባችሁ ያለ መድረክ ለሶስተኛ ጊዜ መዘጋጀቱ ውጤቱስ ተገምግመዋል ወይ? ምናልባት አሁን ወደ የአፍሪካ ህብረት ወደ G20 አባል መሆኑ ነው እየተነገረ ያለው። ጥሩ ነው። አብሮ ለመስራት አብሮ ችግሮችን ለመቅረፍ ይመች ይሆናል። ግን አፍሪካ ህብረት ከጀመረ ጊዜ ጀምሮ ምንድነው ያመጣው ውጤት የሚለው ጥያቄ መስሎ ስለታየ እሱ ብትመልሱልኝ መልካም ነው። በሌላ መልኩ ያልተነሳ አንድ ነገር አለ። እርግጥ ነው ሰዎቹ ዓለማችን ፍትሃዊ የሆነ የሀብት ክፍፍል ስለሌላት አንዱ ተሻጭ ነው፣ አንዱ ሻጭ ነው። ግን የሚሸጠው ሰው ደግሞ በሁለት ወገን እየተጎዳ ያለው አንደኛ በአካል በህይወት እያለ ይሸጣል፣ ሁለተኛ ደግሞ ሁለት ህዋሳቶቹ ይሸጣሉ። ኩላሊቱ ይሸጣል፣ ደሙም ይሸጣል፣ ልቡም ይሸጣል። ሙተው እንኳን ሙቶ ነፃነት የለውም። ስለዚህ እሹ ስለሞተው እግዚአብሔር አክብሮ ስለፈጠረው ሰው እግዚአብሔር ባርኮ የሰጠውን ምድር ላይ እንኳን እንዲቀበር ለምንድን ነው በዚህ ዙሪያ ማናነሳው? ይሄንም ጭምር ልናነሳው ይገባል፣ ክብር ልንሰጠው ይገባል። እግዚአብሔር አክብሮ የሰጠው ነው። አክብሮ የሰጠው ነው። ምድሪቱን አክብሮ ሰጥቶታል፣ እሱም አክብሮ ፈጥሮታል። ስለዚህ ይህንን አፍሪካውያኛ ተሰብስበን ቋንቋችን አንድ ከሆነ ቅድም አንድ አባት በዚህ በኩል ነው ይመስለኛል ለምንድን ነው ሌሎች ወደ አፍሪካ የማይፈልሱ ብለዋል። እርግጥ ነው አፍሪካ ወርቅ ናት፣ አፍሪካውያን ወርቅ ናቸው። ግን ወርቆች ነው ወርቃቸው እንዳይጠቀሙ እየከለከላቸው ያለው ማን ነው? ለዚህስ መፍትሄው ምንድነው ብሎ መወያየት ያስፈልጋል። በኢትዮጵያ ምቹ ሁኔታ አለ። በአሁን ሰዓት ክብር ምስጋና ለፈጣሪ ይድረሰውና ያለን ቤተ እምነቶች ህብረት አለን፣ አንድነት አለን፣ መነባብ አለን፣ መተጋገዝ አለን። ይህን ደግሞ በሁለት ነገሮች አይተነዋል። በኮቪድ እና በኤችአይቪ ኤድስ ላይ አይተነዋል። ኢትዮጵያውያን ሲተባበሩ፣ ኢትዮጵያውያን ሲተጋገዙ፣ ኢትዮጵያውያን ሃይማኖትን፣ ጾታን፣ ጎሳን ሳይለዩ ችግር እንዴት መቅረፍ እንደሚችሉ አይተነዋል። ስለዚህ እናንተ በሌላ ዛሬ ያገኘናችሁ ሰዎች ከርሞም ተገናኝተን ለሪፖርት እንደምንገናኝ አምናለሁ። ፈጣሪ ይጠብቀን ሁላችንን። ብንተጋገዝ ጥሩ ነው እላለሁኝ። ኮቪድን የሚያክል አፍ ክፉ እንዳይናገር፣ አፍንጫ ክፉ ነገር እንዳይሸተው፣ እጅን ቆሻሻ ነገር እንዳይነካው ይህንን ማስተማር ከቻል በህብረት በአንድነት ሆነን ሌላው ችግርስ ያቅተናል ብላችሁ ታስባላችሁ ወይ? ከፈጣሪ ጋራ መጀመሪያ አብዮታችንን ወደሱ ካቀረመ የሃይማኖት ሰዎች እንደመሆናችን መጠን፣ ሁለተኛ ደግሞ እኔ እናንተ እኔን ከወደዳችሁ እናንተ ላይ ሊደረግ የማትሹትን የማትፈልጉትን ነገር እኔ ላይ ሊደረግ አትፈልጉም። እኔም እንደዚሁ። ይኸው ከሆነ ህብረት ካለን ቅንጅነት ካለን ሁሉን ማሸነፍ እንችላለን። ህብረታችንን ፈጣሪ ይባርክ። ሁላችሁም ወዳችኋለሁ፣ አከብራችኋለሁ። እግዚአብሔር ሁላችንን ይባርከን።
Work that we have heard that our faith communities are doing in response to the whole issue, which is the thematic focus for this discussion. So really hats off to the work that you're doing, really deep running work, and we really appreciate that. I wanted to make a contribution based on some of the things that also have been shared. One that relates to the whole issue of realizing that I think from Kevin in the previous presentation, you mentioned that this is an industry of about 236 billion annual, like you said. And there are so many things at stake. And I think one of the things that we actually miss is the whole issue around protection of people like yourselves and protection of people that are speaking up. I guess in many contexts, people who are working, especially activists, I have been in contact with some activists that are talking about these issues that also become targets, both from the traffickers themselves, but also from governments, because there's lots of complicity between governments and most of these traffickers as well. And so if you speak up, you literally are throwing yourself somewhere where you are on your own and you don't have any protection. And they really think that one of the recommendations has to do with protection of people that are actually doing this work, I suppose, from this session. I think the other area that I would like to make as a recommendation has to do with the whole issue of externalization of asylum procedures, which I really think that each and every country must take its own responsibility. I think within Africa, UK, the case that we usually refer to is this UK-Rwanda deal, which, of course, is somewhere maybe hanging in the air. But I think such kind of procedures are things that maybe we should also be bold enough to say that we are concerned, maybe as the G20 Interfaith Forum, that they're already like beginning to be maybe precedents that might actually be established if this actually goes through. And I think it's something that we as Africa or G20 would really need to invest in a bit more discernment. Because I think when we hear from specialized institutions like UNHCR and the others, they basically condemn that this is not the best procedure going forward. And I think we should also register this as a recommendation coming from the G20 forum. I think my other main concern has to do, I think, Kevin, you mentioned this Alan Kurd during the Syria crisis, and when that incident happened and washed off on the beach, it actually created quite a lot of noise, which led to a lot of dissentment and transformation. But I am also concerned, like we had this issue circulation on media where we had a Kenyan woman who was breastfeeding puppies in one country in the Middle East. It made rounds and rounds and rounds. But I think on our part, there has not been, I think, much concern as it relates to this issue. While there's certain issues that countries kind of like prioritize in terms of this is what can be addressed. But when a Kenyan woman circulates the media breastfeeding puppies, that does not startle anyone in their way. So I really kind of like really think for African governments, it's very more important for us really to be protecting our own people. And I think when it comes to these bilateral migration labor agreements, I think they are also found wanting. And I wonder whether there is a role that intergovernmental institutions, I don't really know, Dr. Ahmed already indicated what the limitations are within the African Union. But what we hear is, for example, if we look at maybe Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, how we negotiate with the same countries for bilateral labor agreements, it's kind of like different. So we kind of like, when we negotiate, sometimes there's this tendency to race to the bottom. So I would market myself at the lowest rate. So you'd find what Kenya gets is not what Ethiopia gets or what Uganda gets. So whoever goes on the market with the lowest is the one that actually maybe is likely to be more favorable in terms of how many people can actually go across as part of these bilateral labor agreements. And I wonder whether there's a role for any institution, whether it's IGAD or African Union, in terms of trying to rationalize that we begin to tighten up and begin to demand certain things and certain rights as well. And I think it's important for us to begin to do that. I think these are the things that I wanted to say. The other thing has to do, with, I was having a conversation with one of the person who said that they are one of the advisors to the Kenyan government teaching at Nairobi University when we were talking about this Kenyan girl who had come up breastfeeding. And the whole issue, the way he took it was, it's just a drop in the ocean. And if we really look at the benefits that we get from the remittances as a country, as Kenya, and how much money comes in, and for people to make noise just because one Kenyan girl decided to go there and now they are breasting a puppy. For me, it was really like, really? And this is the response that we can get from government. So sometimes, yes, protection of people as opposed to us getting money or getting remittances, especially now where we say, for most countries, we say what used to come in as development aid long time back has already been overtaken with what is coming in now as remittances. And I think the whole question of protection and human dignity, I think, concerns us as faith-based organizations. Thank you.
የአዲስ አበባ እስልምና ጉዳይ ከፍተኛ ምክር ቤት ፕሬዝዳንት ነኝ። ሱልጣን አማኔ ይባላለሁኝ። ኮንፈረንስ እድሉ ስለሰጠኝ መጀመሪያ አመሰግናለሁኝ። ይህ ኮንፈረንስ በጣም ወሳኝ ኮንፈረንስ ነው። ለሰው ልጆች መብት እና የሃይማኖት ተቋማት ሚናቸው ለህዝባቸው የሚያረጉት የሃይማኖታዊ ማህበራዊ ጉዳዮች ላይ አትኩሮ የሚናገር ነው። ይህ ኮንፈረንስ አምናም እንደዚሁ ተሳትፍቻ አይቻለሁኝ። በአመቱ ነው አንድ ጊዜ የመጣው። ይሄ ነገር ትልቅ እሹ ነው ለህዝባችን። በተለይ የአፍሪካ ውስጥ ያሉ ህዝቦች ብዙ ነገሮች እነዚህ አሁን ዛሬ እና ዘንድሮ የተነሱት አምናም እንደዚሁ ተነስተዋል። ግን ከአምና እስከ ዛሬ ዘንድሮ ድረስ ምን ተሰርተዋል፣ ምን አዲስ ተፈጥሯል የሚባሉ መነሳቶች ይገባል። እኛ በአመት ብቻ እንደዚህ ተገናኝተን ተናግረን ያለውን ነገሮችን አንስተን ብቻ መሄዱ ምን ያክል ጠቃሚ ይሆናል የሚል ነው። በእውነቱ እናንተም አሁን በዚህ ጉዳይ ላይ የተሰማራችሁ በትክክል በየአመቱ እየተሰራና በየአካባቢው የተሰሩ ነገሮችን እየገመትን እየመዘን ከሄን ብዙ ነገሮች ለመስራት ይቻላል። እኛ እንደ ሃይማኖት አባቶች በአዲስ አበባ በኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ የሃይማኖት ተቋማት በፌደራል ደረጃ አለ፣ በአዲስ አበባ ደረጃ፣ በክልሎች ደረጃ ሁሉ አሉ። እነዚህ ነገሮችን አንስተን እንወያያለን። አንድ ላይ ሆነን አዲስ አበባ ላይ ኢትዮጵያ ላይ ያሉት የሃይማኖት አባቶች አብሮነታቸው አብሮ ለመስራት ብዙ እየሰራን ነው የምንገኘው። ዘንድሮ የአፍሪካ ዑለማ ማለት ሊቃውንቶች፣ ዑለማዎች፣ የሃይማኖት አባቶች ህብረት አለ። ዘንድሮ ጋና ላይ ዳካር ሴኔጋል ነበረ። ሴኔጋል በሄንበት ድሮ በታሪካዊ ባሪያ መሸጫ እንትን የሚባል ሀይቅ ሄደን አይተን በጣም አዝነናል። ምን ማድረግ አለብን? አሁንስ ቢሆን እኛ አሁንስ መልኩን ቀየረ እንጂ ቀርቶ ነገር ሁሉ አንስተን ተናግረናል። ግን ይሄንን መልኩን ቀይሮ ከፖለቲካ ጋር ተያይዞ እየሄደ ያለውን እኛ እንደ አፍሪካ ህብረት ዑለማዎች ሊቃውንቶች ምን ማድረግ አለብን የሚለውን ሁሉ አንስተን ተነጋግረናል። ከዚህ አፍሪካ ህብረት ውስጥም ደግሞ አባል ለመሆን ጥያቄ አቅርበናል። 2 አመት ወደ 4 አመታችን ነው። እዚህ አፍሪካ ህብረት ውስጥ ገብተን ብንሰራ አባል ሆነን ብንሰራ ለእንዲህ ያሉ ነገሮች ብዙ አስተዋጽኦ ይደረጋል። ከ46 አገራት ነው ይሄ ህብረት የሚሰበሰበውና የሚናገረው። ይህንን ነገር የአፍሪካ ህብረትም ተቀብሎ አባል አድርጎ በዚህ ጉዳይ ላይ እንዲያግዘው ለማድረግ ቢቀበለን ብለን ብዙ ጊዜ እንናገራለን። እስካሁን ድረስ አባልነቱ ተቀባይነት አላገኘም። እኛ ለአገራችን ለህዝባችን ብዙ ብዙ እንፈልጋለን ሃይማኖት አባቶች። ግን ሃይማኖት አባቶች የሚወስኑት ነገር ውሳኔያቸው ትክክለኛ ስራ ላይ ለማዋል ምን ኃይል አላቸው? ምንስ አቅም አላቸው? ተቀባይነት በየሀገሩ ያለው ተቀባይነት ምን ያክል ነው ብሎ ቢታዩ ብዙ ያለ አይመስለኝም። እኛ እንደ ኢትዮጵያ ጥሩ ሁኔታ ላይ ነው ያለነው። በአሁኑ ጊዜ በተለይ ጥሩ መናበብና አብሮ እንትን ማለት መተጋገዝ አለ። ይሄ በጣም መንግስታችን ለማመስገን የሚወዳለሁኝ እና እነዚህ አሁን ያነሳችሁ ነገሮች በጣም ኢምፖርታንት ነው፣ ሙሂም ናቸው። አንዳንድ ጊዜ እኔ ጥያቄ ይነሳለን። ከአፍሪካ ወደ አውሮፓ ወደ አሜሪካ ይኬዳል። ከአውሮፓና ከአሜሪካ ወደ አፍሪካ ለምን አይመጡም? ፍልሰት ምንድነው እንትኑ ምስጥሩ የሚል ነገሮች ብዙ ጊዜ ይመጡልኝ። ከአፍሪካ የበለጠ አገር አለ ወይ? በሀብት በንብረት በእንትን ምንድነው የሚለው ነገሮች ብዙ ጊዜ ጥያቄ ይሆንልኛል። ስለተሰጠኝ አመሰግናለሁ። ሰላም አለይኩም።
Appreciate the panelists, and my name is Huluf Woldesilase. I am the representative of the African Council of Religious Leaders to the AU here in Addis Ababa. I want to reiterate and support what has been raised by the two fathers and my brother here on most of the issues. I think we need to be bold enough that the root cause of all this is bad governance. Bad governance, exclusion, lack of integral human development that reaches out to every part of the society, empowerment of the society. People do not leave their places voluntarily or just because they don't see hope. And they are not empowered or they don't have enough information and so on. So bad governance, issues of governance, conflict, peace, healing, all these structural level, policy level, governance level issues must be more courageously addressed, especially by faith groups at continental level. It is a moral responsibility in my view, and this cannot be done by in isolation by one faith group or by, it should be done collectively to protect our own collective humanity. So I think at the AU level, I think the African Union should take the needs of African citizens, ordinary Africans, young women and men seriously. It should not be the place of only government officials doing camaraderie or how do you call appreciating each other. That is important, but it is time that Africans be able to move from one place to another place properly. Also, peace and security, ensuring peace and security and inclusive development. African Union must do this. Without this, people cannot stay just because human trafficking is bad. And on the issue of slavery, I want to repeat what has been said. Let's look at it both from the past, not only transatlantic, but also through Indian Ocean, through Sahara and Mediterranean, through other places. It has been done throughout ages. So we need to look at it holistically. But also, there is a slave trade going on in Africa at the moment in different parts of Africa, and even in our own households or in our own backyards. And there are places where people are being sold in African countries. If we read on the internet, there are reports to that effect. So let's treat the existing, the canon, the living Africans at the moment properly with dignity instead of only focusing on the past or the harm that was done by so-called outsider. But we need to humanize that, but also address this issue in a way that it can be meaningful to Africans those of us living today in different parts of the continent. So let's look at it holistically, and I want to appreciate and stop at this. Thank you.
I thank the organizers and the panelists on this issue. I think there is an issue with this microphone. Okay, thank you. I wanted to identify several issues. This question of trafficking at
Your
some
name,
point.
Sir.
Yes. I am Father Stephen Okello. I am a consolata missionary. I'm SECAM liaison officer at the AU. And it's part of our responsibility to collaborate with the Commission on Humanitarian Affairs, Migration, and Trafficking. And I wanted to go to the causes that sometimes are behind the scenes that are causing all these things. I want us to intensify initiatives aimed at fostering effective governance. Governance is at the center of most of our problems that eventually accrue into trafficking. We want to boost advocacy for suitable strategies to address climate change, because climate change is also a very big culprit in this situation. I would suggest that we augment support for strong, transparent, and enforceable legislation that protect victims and punish traffickers. This is a whole area of legal redress, because many governments, we have the laws all the way from the UN initiative with Palermo Protocol to AU here, we have policies. I take Kenya, for example, it has laws, but these laws are not enforceable by deliberation, by design. Let's make laws that can be enforced. I want us to expand efforts to generate funds, because we are talking a lot about this thing, but very few people are willing to put in funds. Like this organization that the lady represents, they need funds to curb trafficking and to assist the victims. There is a lot of need for funding. Finally, we are all faith-based people. Let us pray for this situation. Let us put faith into this thing. Let us put love and hope into this thing. As people of hope and people of faith, let's pray for the victims and the traffickers so that they may be converted. Thank you.
Thank you for the organizers and also the presenters. It was interesting presentation. Just to...
Could you kindly introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Ibrahim Mulushawa from Ethiopia, from Center for National and Regional Integration Studies. Just my point, the first point is about your connection of human trafficking to the transatlantic slave trade, which is very interesting. And what is continuing until this time is, I think, the very economic relationship between the West and the Africa. Therefore, what is not changed is that. Therefore, it is the continuity, I think, emanates from this. Therefore, without dealing with this economic imbalance between the West and that of Africa, do you think that there will be any change, whatever you are going to do on this matter? This is the first point. On the issue of human trafficking, I think we Africans are very good in collaborating with trafficking people, not preventing it. Therefore, someone from, as sister mentioned, that from Uganda to Kenya, then trafficked to other areas. Therefore, it shows that the traffickers are more cooperating to one another than the government. Therefore, if you say something about this, the need for collaboration on the point of preventing is very important. And also, one of the most important things, we as an Africans are increasingly integrated into the world economy. But the world economy is not tackling our problems. For example, in Ethiopia, we are using teff as a cereal in Ethiopia, but now teff is internationalized. But in the past, we can use teff for our purposes. Therefore, we are not being this much exposed to the international market. That makes us more protected in terms of food. But when it comes to integration, integration is good, but it is not in favor of us. Therefore, economy is, I think, very important. The last point quickly is about without peace and stability, I think, human trafficking cannot be tackled. Therefore, I think this panel also should, the presentation should integrate these peace and stability issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we will come back here. Yeah, we will come back the next round. Sorry, if I can, maybe yeah. Okay, would allow you.
Chaplaincy. This is a very important topic for me because while in Seychelles, I worked for migrants and itinerant people. The first thing, we have to get our historical records straight. We should not just be talking of transatlantic slave trade. What about the trans-Saharan slave trade? It is still enduring. You go to Libya, people are being sold in the market. So the AU should also include that one. But there is also this slave trade towards the East. The people who brought the slaves in Seychelles, I'm a citizen of Seychelles, so, are not the people who were coming from the other side. Tipu, who was collecting people as merchandise to Zanzibar and Co., we have to keep our records straight. So it's very important for healing to have the records straight. Secondly, the hotels. As a citizen of Seychelles, you go to these big resorts. Women from Ukraine and even sometimes from Ethiopia are being taken there. Who is talking about that, about these people? They are being trafficked in 5-star resorts. So it's also important about the connection with the powerful. Number 3, we have been talking about rescuing the people who have been suffering left and right. What about the traffickers? Are they being brought to justice, exposed, so that people will know who they are, or they are being protected by powerful lobbies? Last but not least, and that is why we ourselves, African Union, we have to be serious. Many Africans will have loved to remain in the continent, but it has become a crime to migrate into a fellow African country. So what are we doing to enable our people to stay? So the African Union has a big responsibility, because nowadays, if you are an African, you want to go to a fellow African country, it's as if you are committing a crime. The Chinese will come and enter without any problem. You as an African, you go to jail. And that is why now traffickers are taking people to Ethiopia, and the people are Ethiopians to South Africa. People are dying in containers in Malawi. Yes. Why? Because our head of states are not serious about Pan-Africanism and integration. Go to blame the other people while ourselves we are not even doing the minimum we should do in the spirit of Ubuntu. Thank you.
አመሰግናለሁኝ። መላከ ምህረት አባ ኃይሌ ጊዮርጊስ እባላለሁኝ። የመጣሁበት ተቋም ከኢትዮጵያ ኦርቶዶክስ ተዋሕዶ ቤተክርስቲያን መንበረ ፓትርያርክ። በቅድሚያ ስለ ችግራችን መፍትሄዎችን ለመፈለግ በጋራ ያሰባሰበንን በጋራ እንድንወያይ ያደረገንን ልዑል እግዚአብሔር እናመሰግናለሁኝ። ይሄን ካልኩኝ ምናልባት ትላንትናም ዛሬም በተካሄደው ውይይት ላይ ጎርፉን እንጂ የተነጋገርነው ምንጩ ላይ ያልደረስንበትም። ሰዎች ይሸጣሉ፣ ይሰደዳሉ፣ ይፈናቀላሉ የሚለው እሱ ላይ ብቻ ነው ፖይንቱን ያነሳ ነው። ነገር ግን ለመፈናቀላቸው፣ ለመሸጣቸው፣ ለመለወጣቸው ምንድነው ምክንያቱ የሚለውን አላነሳንም። ምክንያቱም ካልተነሳ በሽታው ምንጊዜም ሊቀረፍ ስለማይችል ብሎም እየሰፋ እየሄደ አፍሪካ ምድራችን ያለ ሰው ምድረ በዳ እንድትሆን እየተደረገ ያለበትን ምንጭ ግልጽ አድርገን ለማስቀመጥ ወይ ያልተገለጸልንም ወይም የፈራነው ነገር አለ ማለት ነው። ዋናው ምንጩ እርስ በርሳችን ሰላም እንድናጣ የሚያደርገው ማን ነው? ምክንያቱስ መነሻውስ ምንድን ነው? ለምሳሌ ሰላም ያለበት ሰፈር፣ ሰላም ያለበት ሀገር አገሩን ጠልቶ አገሩን ትቶ የሚሰደድ የሚሸጥም ሰው የለም። ስለዚህ አገሩን ትቶ ሰፈሩን ትቶ ቤተሰቡን ትቶ አገሩን ጠልቶ የሚሰደደው ምክንያት የእርስ በርስ ጦርነት አይደለም ወይ? ይሄን የእርስ በርስ ጦርነት የሚያባላው ማን ነው? ለአንደኛው መሳሪያ በመስጠት አንደኛው ደብዳቢ አንደኛው ተደብዳቢ የሆነ ያለው ይሄን እያደረገ ያለው አካል ማን ነው? ለዚህስ ምንድነው ወደፊት መፍትሄ ሊሆን የሚችለው? ለምሳሌ ሱዳን አሁን ከተማዋ ጠፍቷል። ህዝቡ ተሰዷል። ከተሰደደ በኋላ ለመሸጥ ብቻ አይደለም ለረሃብ በረሃብም ያለቀ አለ። እርስ በርስ ሌላ ጠላት ሳይመጣ ድሮ አፍሪካን ተቀራምተው ነበር። እርስ በርሳችን እንድንጣላ ሳይሆን ተቀራምተው ነበር በግዞት ስር ያኖሩን። ዛሬ ደግሞ በእጃዙር በጦርነት እያደባደቡን ያለበት ሁኔታ አለ እና ይሄን ለምን መነሳት አላስፈልግም? መፍትሄስ ሊፈለግለት የሚችለው በምን መልኩ ነው? ስለዚህ እንደ ኢትዮጵያም ቢሆን እንደ ኢትዮጵያ አሁን የውጭ ጠላት የለብንም። ወንድማማች ነው እየተጣላ ያለው። ማን ነው እያጣለው ያለው? ይሄ እኮ በአሁኑ ጊዜ በቀኝ በእጅ አዙር ቀኝ ግዛት ውስጥ ነው ያለ ነው። በጦርነት እርስ በርስ በመለያየት እርስ በርስ በመጣላት በቋንቋ መለያየት ይሄ ስለሆነ ይሄንም ምንድነው የሚደረገው የሚል ጥያቄ ነው ያለኝ። ሁለተኛው የጉልበት ብዝበዛ የሰው ብዝበዛ ብቻ አይደለም፣ የሀብት ብዝበዛስ የለም እንዴ? ከአፍሪካ ላይ የሚበዘበዘው ሀብት የለም? ይሄ ሀብት ለአፍሪካውያን በቂ ሳይሆን ቀርቶ ነው እኛን እያጣሉ እኛን እያባሉ እኛን እያለያዩ፣ ነገር ግን ሀብታችን እየተበዘበዘ ነው ያለው። ለምሳሌ በትንሹ ሳነሳ እዚህ በሰሜን ትግራይ ጸብ በነበረ ጊዜ እዚያ ሰዎችን ያዋጋሉ፣ እዚህ ወርቅ ይጭናሉ። አሶሳ ምድር ላይ እስካቫተር አስገብተው ወርቅ ሲጭኑ ነበር የውጭ ዜጎች። እኛ እንጣላለን ሞኞቹ። እዚህ ቦረና ምድር ላይ እስካቫተር ጭነው ወርቅ ይዝቁ ነበር። እኛን ያባላሉ፣ ደም ያፋስሳሉ። ስለዚህ ይሄ ለምን አልተነሳም? እኔ እንደ ሀገራችን ነው አሁን ያነሳሁት እንጂ እንደ አፍሪካ አለ። አሁን ሱዳን ላይ የሚደረገው ጉድ የሚያሳዝን ጉድ ነው። ወዴት ይሄዱ ሰዎቹ? ቤታቸው ተቃጥሏል፣ ከተማቸው ተቃጥሏል፣ ስራ የላቸውም፣ የሚበሉት የለም፣ ትምህርት ቤት ተዘግቷል። ትምህርት ቤት ከተዘጋ እኮ ያው ባርነት ነው ቀጥ አይደል? ተሰዶ ብቻ ሳይሆን በሀገሩ ላይም ባርነት ነው። እና ይሄን ጉዳይ ትልቅ ኢሹ ስለሆነ ወደፊት በአፍሪካ እንትንም ተነስቶ እንደ አጀንዳ ቢያዝልና መፍትሄ የሚፈለግበት ቢሆን ለማለት ነው። ሌላው አባቴ እንዳሉት በሃይማኖት መቼም ሰው የፈለገውን ማምለክ ይችላል። አይምሮ አለው፣ ህሊናም አለው። ይጠቅመኛል ብሎ ያመነበትን ማምለክ ይችላል። ያ ሃይማኖቱ የግሉ ነው። ነገር ግን ሀገር የጋራ ነው። ሀገራችን በጋራ ከጠበቅን፣ በሀገራችን ጉዳይ ላይ በጋራ እንደዚህ ተሰባስበን ከተወያየን ምናልባት ሌሎቹም ሊነቁ ይችላሉ፣ ነቅተውብናል ሊሉ ይችላሉና ይሄ ምናልባት ውጤቱ የሚታወቅ ቢሆን ተዋይቶ መበታተኑ መለያየቱና ደግሞ ቀጥሎ በአመቱ መገናኘቱ ሳይሆን በአመት ላይ ይሄን ተዋይተናል ይሄን ውጤት አመተናል የሚል ፊድባክ ቢቀርብ ለማለት ነው። አመሰግናለሁ።
Thank you, Father. We have run out of time, but thank you for these contributions and thank you to the panelists. But before we just stop, I'd like to give a chance to the panelists, 1 minute each, to bring your concluding remarks.
Thank you. I wish we had more time to respond to the questions. So for my closing remarks, I would emphasize for us to really emphasize on what the value of human life is, as well as human dignity. Because we are where we are at, because these two areas have been compromised, where we are seeing someone dying and we are not being moved. We are seeing someone being abused and no action is being taken. So really being able to go back to being able to really to speak to our inner selves and understanding, how we need to be able to go back to being able to actually value the human life and stopping normalizing abuse and exploitation that is currently taking place in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that there were some good points asked about what has happened between last year and next year. And there are many things that have happened, leading from the IF20 and the G20 meeting in Brazil, new laws in Australia, Canada, Brazil, France, EU, and more funding projects. But there has also been a reduction in funding in certain parts of the area. So it's really important that we understand what that is. And one of the things that the IF20 is doing, as I said, is creating a working group with other organizations is going to work on an index to show how much commitment financially and what that looks like is going to be reported each year to the G20. Just one thing I will say as well is that we need the African Union and the EU to come together. That's 82 nations. The impact is important. And just one answer to the gentleman there who asked about why people don't come from Europe and the US to Africa. Unfortunately, the UK and countries in Europe and the US come for your minerals, for your values, but we don't come for your people, and we need to better understand that. But there's just one reminder, the last time we came, it didn't work out too well. So make sure that it's done with dignity and done properly, and that's what's happening at the moment. We're coming exploiting your wealth, but we're not returning it as we should. And that includes that we are using your people globally for human trafficking, and that needs to stop.
Thank you so much. There was a lot of contribution, and we appreciate that there is a gap in the laws and bad governance. And then finally, I can say it is only coming together as one voice that can really help us, because united we can stand, and when we are divided we fall, and they take their advantage of that. So coming together as interfaith is one thing, and then raising a common voice for the vice that we are seeing of trafficking, of bad governance, of migration of people, of wars that are created just to bring chaos so that people can loot from our countries. It's only by coming together and having one voice that we can overcome these vices. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you and to the panelists. And we will carry this conversation as we break up for lunch, I believe, and also to continue in the sessions. Thank you so much.